Hello. Um, so I hope you guys are very, very hungry because we are destined to make you even hungrier now. So I'm delighted to be here with amazing colleagues. I have Barbara Massad, a Lebanese American chef, a cookbook author, a photographer, and a TV host who has written some amazing books that are beautifully illustrated on meze, manouche, and manoué. Just Manu, yeah, just to name a few. And she's also the president of Slow Food Beirut, yes. And her latest book, which I assume many of you guys know, Soup for Syria, it brings the recipes from all around the world, different chefs, and reminds us one more time the importance of sharing food. I have Pupa Dweck. She's a first generation American Jew, an authority on cuisines and customs of Aleppo, Syria, and Aleppian Jewish cookery. And she's the author of one of my favorite books, Aromas of Aleppo. It's absolutely mouthwatering. And she's able to relate not just the recipes, but the culture of events, what's happening, the seasons in her book. I can't say enough about it. And Wasef Harun, he was born in Syria. He grew up in Lebanon, and before coming to the U.S. For education, for school, and him and his wife have first worked in technology and computer sciences. After retiring in 2012, they've opened a restaurant, Meem Neuen, in Seattle. Meem Neuen means thankfulness in Arabic and Farsi. And it's an amazing experiment to bring the food and traditions of the Levant to the American audience. So I haven't eaten there yet, but that's definitely one on my list. So let's talk about our ingredients, guys. What do you guys think about the Levantine foods, ingredients, how we are now seeing it in the global cuisines?
Shall I start?
Yes, Barbara,
Okay,
please.
so we all know the ingredients. We have many of them. I'm not gonna cite them because most of you know them, like the hummus, the tahini, the tabbouleh, the fattoush, the kebab, etc. This food now is gaining recognition more and more. I can see it because a lot of people are calling and saying we want to know more, we want to open restaurants here and there. I was just outside taking a break and I was speaking with a policeman and he was like, I want to go and eat your food. Where can I go and eat your food? So it's something that everybody's craving nowadays because there's a new tendency in the world to eat healthier foods. We have a healthy diet. I lived in America for 8 years. We opened a restaurant when I was growing up. At the age of 15, I started working with my father at his restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this is how the food and everything that has to do with the Levantine cuisine came into my existence and has now been part of my life. I consider myself like an ambassador to the Lebanese cuisine. I'm proud of it. I defend it. I want to keep it alive. I would like to I work with Slow Food, which is an association that is like the Greenpeace of food, and we work together to keep our culinary heritage alive. And I think what you are doing today with all this is to keep our customs, our heritage in different aspects. And the food is definitely a very important aspect. I was once invited at AUB, the Minister of Culture was talking about many cultural things, and he didn't speak about food. So I went to him after the speech and I said, "Excuse me, but you forgot one of the most important cultural aspect of our country, and that is food." And he looked at me like, "Yes, you're absolutely right." And then we became friends, and then he became prime minister, and
Nice.
okay.
So when decades ago, when I started elementary school, I had come from Italy. My parents were both born in Aleppo, Syria. And I was sent to public school, and I had a fluffy white khubz adi, pita bread, with a chunk of dark brown chocolate in it. I had bangs and a sweater set, and I was very proud. I had no qualms about it. I got to school, and all eyes were on me. But there was just a certain kind of security knowing my heritage, being brought up with that heritage. And I learned very early on from my mother, who would tell me that she'd be in the souk with her Arab neighbors, touching shoulders, shopping for spices, shopping for ingredients, all friendly, all cohesive. And so that's how I was when I came in. And just like I taught my classmates about what I was eating, I learned about pudi breads and other cuisines. And I think I was like 7, and that started me off on understanding the communicative powers of food, the language, the vehicle. When I was a young mother, my mother would call me early in the morning and ask me if I prepared the soup. And I would say, yeah, Ma, did you put the veal bones? Did you put the marrow bones? Today, bone broth is like on the rise. It's replacing Starbucks. I was in Whole Foods the other day, and I was going down the aisle, and I saw cartons and cartons of bone broths, fish, regular meat bone broths. So, of course, the Western world took a little respite, but my family and my descendants, who are dispersed all over, never really stopped. So now my daughters call me and say, before I even ask them, they say, Ma, we made the soup. We did it. So I was already brought up with also all the chefs now, nose to tail. Nose to tail. When my friends came over and they asked me, Pupa, what's that? And it was a creamy white dip with all little convolutions on it, and lemon and nut and mint and whatever. And I didn't tell them. I told them, oh no, it's just a dip, but it was actually lamb's brains, and it was delicious, I have to tell you. And today, the movement of grass-fed meats is bringing back the offals that never really left my repertoire of cooking and my contemporaries. It's sweetbreads, it's tongue, it's calf sliver. I used to have to finish every last piece before I could go out and play with my friends, and it was not fully cooked. And you're not leaving. She knew. My mother knew and taught me, and not just my mother, but she taught me personally the value of the glutamine and the collagen and the healthy gut in fermented vegetables, in curing meats like pasterma, of preserving and pickling and harvesting. So today, everything is coming back, but more powerful than just the aspect of the foods carrying on is the power of the language, the power of the communicating to the rest of the world what the Levant is through their culture, through their heritage, the traditions that are connected to the foods, not just the foods. Like one of the pictures I have is sliha, which is a wheat berry dessert that's prepared throughout the Levant. All Jewish, Muslim, Arabs, everyone, there it is. When the baby receives its first tooth, the first phone call to the grandmother is, they got the tooth. The tooth is there. It's a healthy, and it's coming back. Frika. farik is coming back, the smoked green wheat. Uh, it's an ancient grain. It was used in Aleppo and throughout the Levant all the time, very healthy. Now it has a comeback. It's like all of a sudden they discovered it. So, there's a full circle going around, but I have to tell you, my contemporaries and the Aleppian Jews that are dispersed throughout the world, including, from across, from Geneva to Mexico to Panama to Bogota to China. I've been to all those countries, by the way. Istanbul, they held on. But the Western world, because of processed foods and TV dinners, Swanson's, there was a little bit of a respite. For me and my contemporaries, there was no respite. But the rest of the world now is catching on. And like I said, they're not just learning about the foods, they're learning about the cultures and the traditions, which is wonderful. Thank you.
Please go on.
Awesome.
I'm, first of all, very honored to be here, very much in sync with the idea of the Levant, the culture being encoded and transmitted to the world in a way that is very acceptable to the world and that it evolves. My background as a computer scientist, spent many years in startups and technology, so I had didn't really get started to do anything with food, didn't know how to do anything but cook an egg until about 7 years ago, when we tried to, after many startups, got infected with the idea of building something of value and really wanted to do something as a family with my very talented wife who should have been here today, actually, Russia. And we couldn't agree on anything. She's into contemporary arts and culture and fashion, and she's a psychologist by training. And I kept on trying to think about business angles and technology angles. And finally, we realized that through our history, one of the things that united us very often is hosting people for events at our home around our hospitality and around our food. And then it occurred to us at the same time that the representation of Middle Eastern food in the US is terrible. It's below par. It's the worst stereotype you can imagine. And that if we could combine proper representation, the right quality, that it not only would be a great cultural mission, could potentially be a good business mission as well. So it could unite us together, basically. And so we started the startup that's called Meem Neuen today. And so just to track back to your question, which is talking about ingredients, one of our biggest challenges with Meem Neuen was the bread, and also some very specialized ingredients like za'atar, which today is fairly popular in mainstream, not quite mainstream, but trending mainstream cuisine right now. And we still till today source our za'atar from Lebanon because there's no other way to do it to the right quality. And with the help of Barbara, we were able to recreate the magic of bread in our ovens in Seattle. In fact, probably better than any bread you get in the Middle East, because there's the big irony that bread in the Middle East is made with flours that are highly processed and imported, many of them from the West. And so we have a degree of quality that's inferior in the Middle East to that we get here. And, so there's an advantage actually to applying Levantine culture to US ingredients. So to continue with the ingredients, we see the rise of many ingredients. We've seen hummus be very popular right now. Tahini is on the rise. You see many variations of tahini, some craft makers of tahini right now, and some in Brooklyn are becoming very popular.
Yes.
The next ingredient that we see it on the rise right now is labne, which is a strained form of yogurt that has an acidic tang to it. We were seeing it applied in cuisine as well across the board, and we're seeing techniques that are derived from Levantine cuisines that are being applied across the board. So it's a very, very exciting time, and for this year, James Beard Awards is recognizing, I think, Zahav as one of their finalists who represents a modern Israeli cuisine, which we all know it's really Levantine cuisine, and it doesn't matter where the hummus came from, it's Levantine. It's not Israeli, it's not Lebanese, it's not Syrian. And so we're seeing the recognition, not just the ingredients, but we're seeing it at a much, much higher level across the West.
Okay, so to follow up on what you said, Wasif, I want to go stick with the bread. So with the bakeries, you've studied the bakeries extensively, Barbara. What
Yes.
can you tell us about the Levantine bakeries and their influence today in the global kitchens?
So bread in our country is used as a tool, when eating tool. We don't eat with forks, with knives. We eat with bread. So one, two. We are brought up as a child. We eat the first thing that we eat is a piece of bread. We shut the kid up with a piece of bread or cake. You can have your piece. So bread is very important in our culture. Um, so I did a research for 2 years on the manouche. So the manouche is a flatbread with za'atar. You all know what za'atar is. So this book was done. Why? Because I used to think about this is an important lesson that I learned. Um, I used to always think about Italy and the pizza and how important that pizza is and how it's went all over the world and how you can eat pizza now in Asia, you can eat in America, you can eat in Italy, all over the world. So I used to always dream about going to Italy and doing a book on the pizza and the people and the dream, the Italian dream. And then one day I woke up and I said, why am I always thinking about the other side? The grass is greener on the other side. I have this beautiful country. I have this manouche, which everybody thinks about. It's the common denominator in Lebanon. You have the rich, you have the poor, you have the students, you have everybody, all communities. We have 17 communities in Lebanon. We all eat manouche. It's part, like, ask anybody about manouche and you'll have a big, huge smile in their face. So I decided to go all over the country and I visited 250 bakeries in order to learn really like the really precise information about each and every type of manouche. And manouche is what? It's a flat bread with toppings. So the toppings differ from area, from region, and that way I was able to really, because I came to Lebanon when I was 18 years old as an American, Lebanese American, and that trip through the bread, through the manouche, I was able to discover the people, the regions. So bread is like really a very, very important aspect of our culture, of our food, and it means everything.
Wonderful, thank you. Now I want to focus on the cooking methods, Levantine cooking methods and how they have influenced for all of you guys the global kitchens. What kind of differences? I know Pupa mentioned a little bit about them, but can we talk a little more detail?
Okay.
Yeah, sure, you want to go?
So actually, when I was about to write Aromas of Aleppo a decade ago, I went to my mother's setting, Catan, born in Aleppo. Both my parents were born there. I was brought up with the language, the foods, the traditions. So right away in Arabic, and I'll spare you with my Arabic, she told me, Pupa, there is no other food in the whole world like the food of the Halabis. They have the best. And she's saying it in Arabic, which I understood. She said they're the most spiritual. And she's talking about all the Armenians, the Muslims, the Jews, all the groups living in Aleppo. They have, it's the oldest city, the oldest, she didn't say one of the oldest, but she said it's the oldest continuously living inhabited city. It's from biblical times, the best. So I know how my mother feels about Aleppo, the pride that she has for her country. So I took it for what she said. And then I started to do some research. And I realized, as most mothers are, she was right. May she rest in peace. In fact, I met with Claudia Roden, the famous, very renowned, I'm sure many of you in the audience know of her, food historian of the Levant, and we met in London. And she called the cuisine of Aleppo the pearl of the Arab kitchen. So as my research went on, I realized the location, the trade route, the Silk Road, the tremendous long souks. They were UNESCO National Heritage Sites, the khans, the opulence of Aleppo, especially during the turn of the 17th century. It was the jewel of the Ottoman Empire. The caliphs and the sultans would send in their chefs to copy the recipes that were being created in Aleppo. So there was quite a bit of information validating her feelings. So I knew from a very young age that my friends were starting to cook meatloaf instead of going through the hassle of calling up their mother or their grandmother and getting a yebrat recipe, which put a little of this, cook it for a sa'a, which could be a minute or 4 hours, put the pot, don't take the pot. I was a nervous wreck. I was newly married, I was 18 or 19, but from then I started really documenting the recipes. But then in 2007, I started really seriously documenting them because now I'm a young mother and I'm thinking of my grandchildren. But subliminally, I was also thinking of the world at large. So the book Aromas of Aleppo came out in 2007. And every single recipe was authentic. My mother was a well-known cook from Aleppo, really famous for her cuisine, but I went to other sources, other grandmothers and other aunts to make sure it was authentic. And the book was published, and it created a way that the cuisine continued. But then, and I received tremendous emails and thanks, not just from the Jewish community, but from all over the world, thanking me. I made the balawa, I made kibbeh, and they could do it behind closed doors. So no one was watching, and every single recipe was foolproof. But then in 2011, I received a different kind of thankfulness and gratitude. I received calls from the likes of National Geographic. What's your message? What's your message to the citizens of Syria? What could you tell them? And my message was that you carry your heritage with you. It's not a matter of demographics, it's not a matter of geography. It's in you, it's in your soul. Your traditions, your heritage, your foods are with you. And I've received so many, I have archival photos, I have different stories about superstitions and language and traditions. And, you know, so Aleppo is special, and the rest of the Levant is also special. Don't think, you know, I have to be careful. I can't sound like my mother too much. So that's my message. And I'm very, very excited. I feel like I was led by something bigger than me to get this published. And it's just beyond my wildest dreams. You know, I got married at 18. I continued my education, but I'm in a world that I never thought I would be in because I was true to my values and true to my heritage and true to realizing just how important tradition, food, and heritage is to keep strong families. Strong families brings a stronger world. And that's what we're striving for. And also, we need the rest of the world to understand us better.
So I now want to ask Wasef about the impact of your restaurants. I'm taking the conversation a little bit more to the west side, right, where we're from. So the impact of your restaurants in the tech community, in the community in general, how do they receive it? What can you tell us about that?
I'd be happy to answer. I want to just touch on the techniques part just for a second, because there's an answer that question is as a computer scientist first, and then as a more like somebody who's
Definitely, yeah.
involved in the human side of it. As a computer scientist, we see just historically lots of techniques that were pioneered in the Levant. Food processing was invented in the Levant. Hummus takes 2 days to make. You dry the chickpeas first, and you soak them, you blanch them, you boil them, etc. And there are many foods that come from the Levant that have these very meticulous processing elements to them that take a chickpea, create something magical out of it. And so a lot of these elements of food processing come from the Levant, and we should not lose fact of that. And it's something that's really not just a heritage, it's something we have to continue developing that way. And a lot of that processing is natural. It's not through injecting chemicals or doing something strange with the food that makes it toxic or makes it unusable, or adding sugar, all the things that the West has been ailing from since the Industrial Revolution here. There are aspects of the cuisine that are dependent on the techniques that also are related to the time in which it was developed. So we have a whole cooking style called bezet. I don't know if you so basically cooking mostly vegetables with different types of vegetables, with olive oil and some spices. But if the net effect is that it's a food that can stay at room temperature without spoiling, and can be served, and it's typically served in meze style. But the actual benefit of this is that you can have food available to consume at many different times of day, and that's again a very important technique. There are baking techniques that were developed. There are techniques that involve processing of meat that are very sophisticated, like kibbe. If you think about kibbe as this delicacy, but kibbe is a way to merge grain with meat, because meat is relatively scarce throughout the history of the Levant, to improve the yield, to improve the amount that you can feed and deliver them. So there's, on the technique side, there are many very important lessons we can take from the Levant. And when we started Meem Neuen, we spent a lot of time trying to teach this technique to our initial chefs. And Barbara was involved in that process in the very early part, and it was very painful, very slow, because we were striving to teach technique to very qualified chefs who already knew every technique in the book, and it wasn't until we stopped trying to teach them how to cook, and actually started really training their palate, that things went into turbo mode, basically, and that's the big lesson we learned, that not only the aspects of the technique has to do with how you prepare something, but it has more to do with what somebody should expect it to taste like and be experienced later. And that's a big part of what I see is important for the growth of and propagating Levantine cuisine and the culture with it, is that you train the expectations and not train the cooking aspect. So that's the cooking question. In terms of the tech impact, very fortunate in Seattle. We're in one of our fast food restaurant called Meem Neuen Street, and a variant called anar. Anar means pomegranate in Farsi and Urdu, which is also the tree of life. So anar is our very conscious take on Levantine cuisine, where we took all the healthy aspects of it and put it together in a way that would be fast and affordable. And so it's vegetarian, no sugar added, a big selection of offerings, and you would not guess what the bestseller is at Anar. Can we take sampling? It's a very well-known Middle Eastern dish. Who would hazard a guess? Mjaddara.
Oh,
There you go.
that's the best.
The Mjaddara
Yes.
is by far and
Definitely.
beyond. Yes, it's the absolute winner by all, and it's amazing
is.
because Mjaddara is one of the first things you eat as you're growing up.
It
The
really
first
is.
things that somebody
Yeah.
learns how to prepare at home.
Yep.
And how could you take away from the simplicity and the perfection of rice, lentils, caramelized onions, and some spices? And so that's a fantastic testament. And Mjaddara doesn't care who you are, what you are, whether you're coming from. So that's the part that's very interesting about it. So the impact on the tech community wasn't that we did anything special to them. There's already a demand in that community. One of the hallmarks of the tech community in Seattle and the Silicon Valley is that they have very little time, they have money, So discretion is very important, and you need to be able to fill that need very quickly. And they typically come from other cultures where they're not afraid to try something a bit different. And so we were able to provide for that, and the demand has been phenomenal. And we see so we could have, for example, you could have substituted our restaurant with a hole-in-the-wall, typical, stereotypical, Middle Eastern food place that would sell a shawarma for $4, let's say. And imagine the harm that this place would be doing to our culture compared to doing it well and putting the hard work into delivering the right kind of product. And one of the side effects that we're seeing right now is that this conditioning is a form of education that's taking. This conditioning is spilling over into other parts of their life. It's spilling over. We see that the same person who tries a shawarma or mashwarma, if you want to, tries at Meem Neuen Street is more likely to want to try something a little bit more sophisticated somewhere else. And it's starting that virtuous cycle that we have. And on the screen is this I'll mention another. This is a mushroom, portobello mushroom shawarma to satisfy the need. This is a very typical tech need of many vegetarians who want something that eats and feels and like meat, but without going to a substitute meat product. And so it's a portobello mushrooms that are marinated like lamb and prepared like a lamb shawarma. And it's an example of not only taking the classical shawarma, but adapting to what the environment needs.
Wonderful. Barbara, did you want to say anything about the cooking?
I want to eat one now.
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready.
Looks good.
Okay, our last question before we head into our delicious lunch prepared for us by Philippe Massoud of Ilili in New York. What defines the Levantine diet, and how does what we'll be enjoying in a few minutes exemplify our cuisine?
So our diet is based mostly on seasonal products, more vegetables, less meat, less fat. So I think that Philippe, and I'm very excited to eat his food because I know him, but I've never tasted his food, so I'm looking forward. It's healthy. I'm gonna give you an example. I used to live in America, like I said before, and I was 10 kilos overweight. I came to Lebanon, 6 months later, I was 10 kilos under. And it just happened like miraculously, and I was eating the same quantities. So this is when I understood that there's something that logical in the way that we eat in Lebanon.
Definitely, definitely. Pupa?
Oh, so I have a picture of Mahmoud someplace. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So today for dessert, there it is. They'll be serving Mahmoud. And one of the reasons I picked that particular pastry as an example is that in Syria, and throughout the Levant actually, the Mahmoud, today's pudding, and that's the pastry that is served for the gifts of Mishlawach Manot that are given out. It's also the pastry for the fast Ramadan, and it's also used as the pastry on Easter. So I love the unison of this dessert and how it's a perfect example of how minjedra and pickles and fermenting and curing and all these things are one. Many people have asked me, what's the difference between the Jewish Arab cuisine and Arab cuisine? And I wasn't planning to address the question, but right before the panel, one of the professors for the history of the Levant asked me that question. So I think it's important to address it. It's Arab food that throughout the Levant, it's Arab food. And the descendants of my family were Mustarabiyas. They were born in Syria. They're Arabs. My grandfather wore a turban. He was dressed in the garb. They spoke the language. Everything was Arab. So the only difference between the Arab food and the Arab Jews eating Arab food is the mixture of milk and meat and the way the meat is slaughtered. So there's no claims to an Arab Jewish cuisine. It's Arab cuisine that the Jews have acclimated to for their halachot. And I'm happy that I clarified that. Because there's no claim. Now, what's beautiful is that this cuisine, although there are no Jews living today in Aleppo, not one, this cuisine is being enjoyed globally. When my sons were in university, they would go to Geneva or Mexico, Panama, all over, and they would spend the week with family members because everybody from Aleppo went somewhere. And they would come back and tell me, Ma, the kibbeh hamda, the kibbeh, the torpedoes, the rice and fasulya, everything. If we closed our eyes, we would be home. And it's spectacular. So it's exciting to know that future generations that do leave the Levant, and I hope they don't, and I hope they all come back and everything's beautiful again, that they didn't lose everything. Nothing's lost. And to me, that's a very important message for everybody that, we could continue. And I feel very strongly about it. I also want to just bring up one thing about methods. Many years ago, I learned how to make baby eggplants, little tiny baby eggplants. I would go to the market, the U-Pick farm, and get them when they were this big. And my mother would teach me how to make the baby eggplants. And we put lime and hydrogen peroxide in it and everything. No one died. And these jars would be decades old. I had a fundraiser in my house. I'll make it very quick. I had a fundraiser in my house, and I prepared the baby eggplants. A friend of mine said to me, Pupa, I can't believe it. I have a jar of these that I never opened from my Aunt Lela. It's 30 years old.
Wow. It's the Makdous, right?
No, not makdus. It wasn't makdus. It was with cloves and just made with the shira, with the fragrant syrup and a heavy syrup. But it was preserved with, at that time, lime, which I found. And but today they'll use hydrogen peroxide. So I said, Frida, did you ever open it? She said, no, it wasn't open. I said, go home and get it. And we had maybe 100 people in my home. We were doing a major fundraiser. She brings it, and we have it on video. And we opened my jar, and we opened her jar, and there was a pop. And they said, you're really going to eat it, Pupa? I said, of course I'm going to eat it. And they tasted exactly the same. And I'm not sure how many of you know this, but this particular sweet, Hilu Banjan, is served by great-grandmothers at their great-granddaughter's engagement parties. It's one of the traditions. So I like to say that the Helabis are way ahead of this molecular gastronomy and all this scientific stuff. We've been doing kimchi and probiotics and preserving foods from centuries and centuries ago. So I
Awesome. Do you want to say a couple of things?
Madame,
Thank you. Thank you.